Hello readers, welcome back. Today we're going to be doing some compilation kind of quick recommendations of what I've been reading in terms of comics and graphic novels. So how this is going to be a little bit differently than some of the other videos. I'm not going to be going quite as in-depth about some of the characters and themes within each story, but more so just giving you a general overview, some of the good and the bad elements in my opinion, and overall, do I recommend it, yes or no? And because I've been reading so many, I don't necessarily have the time to do an individualized video for every one. But with all that aside, let's go ahead and get started with our first title for this video, which is going to be Green Lantern Rebirth, originally published in 2004. So diving into our overview, the greatest Green Lantern ever, Hal Jordan, was corrupted and became evil. The Green Lantern Corps came together to defeat him, but he was killed during the conflict. Now the evil has reemerged, but the Corps is at its weakest point without its greatest hero. Will fear win and defeat the universe's protectors? So what's some of the good and the bad about this story? First of all, there's really great character development for Earth's Green Lantern cast to shine. So because Hal Jordan is such a big kind of character and takes up so much space within Green Lantern, we don't always get to see all of the other Green Lanterns that play. We get a showcase from all the Green Lanterns, so Guy Gardner, John Stewart, and the new Green Lantern within this story, Kyle Rayner. There's really epic action sequences, and the artwork is really well done. In fact, within this story specifically, there's one action sequence, the final battle really, that was so kind of epic and scaled up so much that I really was imagining to myself, like, wow, this would be such an amazing like TV show or movie to see this fight on the screen. That's not something that I personally usually find myself doing specifically with comic books. In general, when I read, I definitely think of it in a visual way a majority of the time. But with comics, because you can see the author's vision or the illustrator's vision really on the page, I usually that's enough for me to kind of visualize it. But this one particular sequence specifically was just like epic, and I just found myself being like, this would be amazing to see. In terms of a recommendation, if you like Green Lantern as a character or just want a fun superhero comic book read, definitely would recommend. This is super quick and easy read, super fun, and again, I just think it was really well done for the kind of story that it is. Next we have Siege by Brian Michael Bendis, originally published in 2009 from Marvel Comics. So this is an event comic tying with Fear itself and some of the Avengers and Thor storylines that were taking place at that time. In particular, this story is about Asgard being moved to Earth and kind of humanity's reaction, the Avengers' reaction, and an ensuing attack that takes place on Asgard. The majority of this story is really like an action-based story, kind of going over the events of the attack, the assault, and everything that's playing out through that. So super action-packed story. In terms of like really character development, not anything really huge. There's no, in my opinion, like real big character defining moments or anything like that. Not to say that there aren't cool moments in general in the story, but I don't know that the stakes just felt super high for me. I don't know that I was super invested in Asgard's fate, to be perfectly honest. In terms of a recommend, if you're a big Marvel fan or you really like event comics or Thor mythology specifically, then sure, pick it up. Otherwise, I would say probably not worth your time. There's definitely better event comics out there, specifically from Marvel or for the Avengers. Next, we have Batman Incorporated by Grant Morrison, originally published in 2010. To dive into our overview for this story, accepting Bruce Wayne can't be everywhere at once, he is funding Batman Incorporated, a new initiative to bring together heroes inspired by Batman from all over the world to ensure they have the resources and training to continue to protect their communities. In terms of the good and the bad, the cover art for the Batman Incorporated series was really, really cool, because we're talking about different cultures and different countries and characters, so there's a lot of incorporation of like national flags and really beautiful artwork for the covers of the stories. Unfortunately, I didn't really care about any of the international heroes because there was no real scale or story building or stakes for these people. And in fact, some of the stories were so low stakes that I actually felt it made Batman look kind of lame. The plot was super convoluted, and they were trying to make all the stories connect at the end, but it seemed really sloppy to me. It was honestly really tough to read, which is super disappointing for a Batman comic specifically, and it seemed really poorly written, which is surprising because Grant Morrison is super prolific and has done a ton of really great comic work. I did not enjoy this one at all. I would say definitely don't recommend, even if you're a fan of Batman like me. I did not find it worthwhile. Next, we have Suicide Squad Bad Blood by Tom Taylor, originally published in 2019. Like most Suicide Squad tales, this story follows a group of superpowered folks who are given a choice to carry out impossible missions with a high likelihood of death in exchange for their lives and a chance at early parole versus life in prison. Maybe I shouldn't have been surprised. I think Tom Taylor is a really talented writer, and I've liked some of his other work as well as I think the Suicide Squad in general is a really fun group. I kind of picked this book up on a whim, and it was super, super fun. Again, I don't think the stakes here are all that high. The mission that they're doing isn't world-ending events type of scenario, but the art throughout was really beautiful and well done. I thought the story was super engaging. I cared about the new characters that we were meeting, as well as got invested in the characters that we already knew from beforehand. The thing that makes Suicide Squad so good is there are genuine surprises in terms of you meet characters and you truly don't know if they're going to live to the next page or not, because that's kind of the nature of this type of comic, is people die. I don't know that this is a life-changing comic. If you're new to comic books, maybe not something that I would say you have to pick it up, but if you're looking to just expand a collection or get to know a little bit more about comics characters or who the Suicide Squad in particular are, then I would recommend this story. Next, we have All-Star Superman, again by Grant Morrison, originally published in serial form in 2006. All-Star Superman follows Superman as he learns that due to extreme radiation from the sun, he has an incurable type of cancer. Essentially, his cells are over-radiated. He's absorbed too much solar energy, and while his powers are strengthened by it in terms of he has more strength, speed, endurance than ever before, it's also going to kill him quite soon. And this story takes a look at the strength of Superman, his character, how he acts, and the legacy ultimately that he wants to leave behind. There's some really interesting elements in the story. We get to examine characters like Lois Lane, Lex Luthor, and Jimmy Olsen, all super important characters within Superman's mythos. And to some extent, they're kind of scaled back to their most pure forms in terms of Superman is a great person who cares about people and humanity and wants to do the right thing. There are some things that I really liked about this story. Certain chapters were really grounded and I was emotionally invested. Some of it I wasn't quite as invested in. Maybe it was a little bit too silly for me. Maybe I just don't quite understand all the Superman lore, as he's not a character that I've read about extensively. I also think the artwork for me is not really something that I would usually enjoy or get super into. It wasn't bad art by any means, just not really my cup of tea, and I think maybe that detracted from the story a little bit. Overall, in terms of a recommendation, this is considered to be one of the best modern Superman stories. For me personally, I don't know that I got all that much out of it. However, if you're a fan of Superman, then I think this would be considered a must-read selection. Next, we're going to talk about JSA: The Golden Age by James Robinson, originally published in serial form in 1993. This is an interesting comic. So if you're not familiar, JSA is essentially meant to be an earlier iteration of JLA, which is the Justice League of America, which is what we think of as Superman, Green Lantern, and all of the kind of modern heroes. Within JSA, it's the Golden Age. So comics has a couple of different ages: golden, silver, bronze, that refer to the time of publishing and the characters which are involved within those stories. This has a lot of the Golden Age characters who, to a modern reader, a lot of these characters are frankly kind of obscure, maybe people you don't really know about, or who have kind of vanished out of the lens of the popular zeitgeist. Going into the overview, this story is generally about these characters in a point of retirement. It takes place after the Second World War has ended, and all these characters are kind of in retirement. They're trying to move on with their lives, and they have lots of personal issues that each one of them is working through. Which brings us to the good and the bad elements of the story. All of the characters in this story feel individual. They have their own unique identities, and their problems feel real and grounded. It's also interesting because it's a story of its time in terms of the actual time period. It's taking place in the mid-40s, and so there are references to cultural elements of that time and place. A lot of the story is presented as kind of a mystery. You don't exactly know what happened or why things are happening the way that they are, which is kind of an interesting take for this type of story specifically, because it definitely doesn't read as a crime noir story or anything of that nature. It's a lot more hopeful. So overall, that made it a really enjoyable reading experience. There are a lot of things that I really liked about it. The main kind of detractor for me was the conclusion felt a little bit clumsy, kind of predictable and unoriginal, but at this point, this comic is about 30 years old, so maybe at the time it was slightly of a less used up trope. Overall, I still really liked it. If you're into slightly more obscure characters or into Golden Age characters or the JSA in general, definitely recommend this one. Next, we have Black Lightning Year 1 by Jen Van Meter, originally published in 2009. Black Lightning Year 1 follows the story of Black Lightning in his first year as Black Lightning. This has become kind of a trope, in a sense, a comic trope for artists and writers to talk about what happened in a character's first year as their superhero alter ego. This originally started with Batman Year 1 by Frank Miller. Unfortunately, I wasn't super into this story. I didn't love the art style, and I felt like the story was underwhelming in a sense. So we meet some of Black Lightning's main nemesis, but I felt like the direction of the overall plot was kind of lacking. Within each chapter of the story, we have a different narrator, someone important in Black Lightning's life, who's talking about their kind of experience of him, their impression of him as a person, and the impact of him and his heroism that has on their life. This is weaved throughout the chapter in text boxes simultaneously as dialogue is happening with kind of live situations of Black Lightning confronting villains or what have you. I felt like this kind of approach to the story made it really confusing because there were almost like two conversations that you were trying to keep track of simultaneously through the text boxes, which were telling one story, versus the live action and dialogue, which is happening simultaneously on the page in a live scenario between Black Lightning and whoever he was talking to. So that was one piece of it, but also just as short as the story was, there was simultaneously not enough direction with where they were wanting to go in the story they were wanting to tell, while simultaneously there were almost too many kind of villains where we didn't really get any sort of dimension to in my opinion, any of the characters, including Black Lightning, even through all of these initiatives, because it was kind of just they were trying to do too much action or adventure without any real development of the characters or explanation into why he's choosing to do what he does. Next, we have Icon, A Hero's Welcome by Dwayne McDuffie, originally published in 1993. Icon's a really interesting story, originally published by Milestone Comics, which was later bought by DC. Milestone focused on Black stories, specifically Black superhero comics. And Dwayne McDuffie, who wrote this story, was actually one of the main people who got shows like Static Shock onto the WB as an animated series for kids, as well as he was one of the main forces who got John Stewart, the Black Green Lantern, into the Justice League and Justice League Unlimited animated series. So in terms of representation of Black superheroes, Dwayne McDuffie has done a lot of really great stuff. And I was excited to pick up this story because I knew a little bit about Dwayne McDuffie, but also slightly about Icon and Rocket, who's the other hero in Icon's story. Icon, A Hero's Welcome, is the beginning and introduction of these two superheroes, Icon and Rocket. Icon is a super old alien who crash landed on Earth in the 1800s, and the first person that he came in contact with was a Black person, and because of that he lived through slavery and abolition and everything else, and we learn a little bit about that within this story. But he meets a young girl named Rocket who discovers that he has these superhero powers and convinces him to use them for the betterment of his community. So he has these actual superpowers, but he also has advanced technology, which he allows Rocket to use, and she's able to become a superhero in her own right using this kind of technology. The story is super interesting in terms of an analysis of two opposing views on the Black experience through kind of a seemingly more modern versus a more conservative, older lens. So Icon he's been on Earth for a really long time. In some ways he's kind of jaded, and he has views that things are the way they are and there's no real chance of him changing those things. He kind of views Black people as being in a situation that's their own fault, and they didn't pick themselves up by the bootstraps and solve their living situation or all of their issues in their life by themselves, and that's their problem. Versus Rocket, who's a young woman growing up really poor in a metropolis, and she is much more kind of sympathetic, but also it's her own experience of her life growing up with a single parent, and she understands the struggle from day to day. It's a really interesting view on, number one, those two characters' kind of dynamic and conversations with each other. I think it's really insightful into generational lenses and generational differences in opinion through that lens. I also think Dwayne McDuffie is able to write a pretty complex female character in Rocket. She is really our main kind of narrator of the story. She's the main person that we're following, even though the comic is titled Icon, and Icon in some ways is the leader, whereas Rocket is more of his sidekick, you could say. But really, Rocket in a lot of ways is the focus of the story. She's writing, she's our POV. And one of the things that I really liked about this story is it's more than just a superhero story. It's more than just a story about fighting villains, but it's actually trying to take a look at and tackle bigger issues such as race, such as wealth disparity, such as the experience of growing up impoverished or teen pregnancy. This is a really, really interesting comic. I think that they were looking at some really interesting ideas at a time when maybe not a lot of other people were, and choosing a really interesting medium to do that through comics. I really loved A Hero's Welcome, which is kind of the first part of Icon's initial run, and I definitely plan to pick up the second one. I would for sure recommend it. I think it was really, really well done and interesting, both in the superhero aspects as well as aspects of life in general. And our very last comic for today is going to be Wonder Woman and Justice League Dark, The Witching Hour, originally published in 2018. So similar to Superman, I haven't yet picked up a ton of Wonder Woman comics. I've read about her in team-up events and everything, but really this story centers on Wonder Woman and also Justice League Dark, who are some really interesting characters. It's kind of like a magical and slightly more morally gray version of the Justice League. So you have characters like John Constantine, Swamp Thing, Zatanna, who are interchanging players within the Justice League Dark, but this story also centers on Wonder Woman. And within The Witching Hour, it's taking a look at some ancient kind of mythology, specifically at Hecate, who is shown in this story to be a mischievous goddess of magic and kind of a wellspring of magic on Earth. It takes a look into both magical elements of Wonder Woman and her kind of mythology within Greek mythology and also within the DC universe, as well as taking a look at Hecate as a villain and actually making her kind of a sympathetic villain who's shown to be taken advantage of by men when initially all she wanted was to spread her magic and help people, and through her willingness to help, she was taken advantage of. It kind of ends up being a little bit of a tragic story within this collected trade paperback specifically, which I actually appreciate because I think even within the median of like comic books themselves, characters aren't always really given a full, well-rounded display, specifically if they're in this kind of shortened event team up. I thought the artwork was really good in this. I thought the characters were again kind of given a chance to be slightly more well-rounded. We got to see a lot of Wonder Woman, and I thought she was super likable within the story, even though she's shown to be flawed and she doesn't always make the right decisions, but she does always try to. Also, always love the Justice League Dark characters. They don't really take a huge role in this story. It's really mostly about Wonder Woman, but again, I'm okay with that. I think she was really fascinating in this story. I love the way that she was presented and the way that it was written. This could be read as a completely solo title. It leads from other events and also leads towards new things, but within this trade collected paperback, it really could be enjoyed as its own story. If you're interested in Wonder Woman or any of the Justice League Dark characters, I would definitely recommend this one as well. I thought it was really well done. I love the art, and I'm looking forward to reading some more Wonder Woman stories in the future. If you stuck with me to the end, thank you so much for watching. Hopefully I wasn't too rambly here. I had a couple notes down, but really I was kind of just more so free-flowing my general thoughts and ideas. Like I said, I've been reading quite a sizable stack here over the past couple of months and wanted to share some of those before the list got too long and I started to forget kind of what was happening from story to story. Also, if anyone has read any of these stories or has any interest in doing so, let me know which ones sound interesting to you or which ones you've really enjoyed for yourself. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye.